Right now, the Elden Ring build for Switch 2 is public and people have gotten a hold of it. And spoiler alert, it runs just as well as it does on other platforms, which is to say it's complete trash because the game was trash to begin with. But the giant narrative that sprung up around this version, that it was unplayable, that it was broken, that the Switch 2 wasn't powerful enough for it, just has completely collapsed and really shouldn't have been a thing to begin with, considering this game had PS4 and Xbox One versions and was not technically demanding to begin with. People really seem to not understand that Elden Ring is not that technically demanding of a game. It's probably less sophisticated than Breath of the Wild. Elden Ring is just this incredibly lazy, boring, derivative open world slop that people really hype up as being something it isn't. And the game's hype cycle is long over, especially because the shit stain on the Turd Tree DLC flopped the way it did. But Elden Ring still is very, very relevant for a lot of people because, the Switch 2 version is upcoming, 3 years later, and we're getting the game and its DLC on the superior gaming platform, which made the rivalry between it and Tears of the Kingdom, it and Nintendo in general, just completely laughable in retrospect. So you're saying that I should have gone out and bought an Xbox for a single game when I could have just waited and gotten it on a Switch 2, why exactly would I have ever have done that, and now, once the game is ported over, once the Duskbloods comes out, that should be it. FromSlop is never, ever, 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 ever going to be this relevant again because this 100% was the sort of game that people only propped up because they thought that it would get one up over Nintendo. That was the mindset of these people. That's what they tried to tell you. That's what they did. That was their cope and their seethe. They really thought that Elden Ring was somehow going to destroy Nintendo. And here we are a couple of years later with an Elden Ring port that nobody is excited for, nobody cares about, and an exclusive from Slop game coming to Nintendo Switch 2 that also nobody cares about. And we kind of see the natural endpoint for these major third-party exclusives. The games that you were supposed to run out and buy PlayStations and Xboxes for, the games that are supposedly better than Nintendo. Not only will they not do as well Nintendo as Nintendo, not only will they not sell as well, not only will they not make as much money, not only will they not be as popular, they won't stay relevant very long. Because it's kind of shocking to me, seeing games like, say, Princess Peach Showtime or Xenoblade Chronicles, mentioned in mainstream TV shows, while Elden Ring is just a perpetually online phenomenon. And that's kind of my mindset, looking at this. When I look at Elden Ring, when I look at FromSlop in general, when exactly was this series ever relevant in the real world? Because all I've ever seen from Dark Souls is just people gushing about it online, saying it's the greatest thing ever, the hardest video game they've ever played. And then meanwhile, in the real world, everyone's just playing harder games all the time on Nintendo platforms. Elden Ring in a lot of ways is kind of the defining example of the PS4 era in general. In a lot of ways, it's the last real PS4 game, because it did launch on that platform. It's just one of those examples of a game that was propped up, that was worshipped, that was hyped up because the audience didn't really have anything else to play. That's the grim reality of of Elden Ring, in the simplest possible way. This is a game that was only hyped up to downplay Nintendo. And now that it's coming to Nintendo, now that it's getting a new entry on Nintendo, there is shockingly little enthusiasm or excitement. If this game truly was, the game of the decade, or FromSlop really was a goated developer, there should be a lot more hype and enthusiasm for Duskbloods than there is. But the instant that Nintendo confirmed that it was an exclusive, everybody just kind of plugged their ears and tried to pretend the game didn't exist. And if they do acknowledge it, they try and cope and seethe and say it's going to come to other platforms eventually. That's kind of their mentality on it. It's the same behavior we saw with the Fatal Frame IP, where it was like this beloved horror game that became Nintendo exclusive and then was just ignored by the people who prop up the first three as some of the best horror kino ever made. We saw the same thing with Bayonetta. Like Bayonetta 2 and 3 are still heavily disregarded, even though 3 in particular is a lot better than the original in a lot of ways. Um, we see this over and over and over again with like these adult games like on Nintendo platforms where everybody just passes over them because like, well, Nintendo isn't the console for this, and like it's just a giant cope. It always has been, and it's rooted in like weird misconceptions from the 90s in regards to like, the Mortal Kombat thing and all that. But like looking back on it, like, how much longer can this thing continue? Because, like the way things are looking now, like Grand Theft Auto 6 is going to be the last time that any major third-party game like ever outperforms a Nintendo exclusive. By the time Grand Theft Auto 7 comes out, Animal Crossing will probably be just as popular as it is. Mario Kart will be just as popular. Mario will be just as popular. Like, there's going to be a major dropping off point for Grand Theft Auto eventually. And I'm very curious to see like what the industry is going to look like then, because without PlayStation's golden goose, the only thing driving console sales and keeping people engaged, like there just is nothing more to it. Like there is going to be a gradual like exodus from Grand Theft Auto as people move away onto other franchises. Like it's shocking when you actually talk to people who play Grand Theft Auto and they tell you what they do. Like I met someone who played the game and only went to the casino, to simulate gambling, because she was a gambling addict, right? Like, that's the mindset that a lot of these people have. But, the reality is eventually some big gambling thing is going to take off, and become relevant and is going to like kind of attract those kind of people. People who are into racing are going to play racing games. People who are into sports are going to play sports games. People who are into like the shooting are going to play shooting games. The Grand Theft Auto's niche of being this kind of like wide as an ocean, deep as a puddle, with all these different things to see, do, and experience. Like it's going to slowly stop being impressive over the next several entries to the point where, like, I am certain at a certain point that it is going to start being lame to a lot of people. And honestly, like even more experienced players will kind of tell you that like the aiming in these games is kind of floaty. Like the driving in these games is kind of weird. For as big and expensive as they are, like, these games are just not that good. And I think in a lot of ways the same could be said for Elden Ring. Going open world may have brought in a lot of people, but like, was the open world better than Dark Souls? Like the answer is a resounding no for anyone who's played both. And that's kind of my feeling on this, is that like FromSlop is going to go through the same kind of arc where people are going to start getting bored of like the established formula, but they're also going to reject any and all attempts at going against the grain and doing something else. And we're starting to see that already. Sekiro wasn't popular, Armored Core 6 wasn't popular, and Duskbloods is not going to be popular. Like we have seen like the term souls fatigue start to creep into the common discourse, and it's only a matter of time until people start addressing the elephant in the room, is that people are bored of From Slopware games. And when that happens, like you're just not going to see this company ever really recapture the same success it had over the past decade, because this company fulfilled a niche that no longer exists. They were making more difficult video games in a time where everyone else was becoming increasingly casualized. But now that that's no longer a thing, they are quickly reaching the point where they can't really remain competitive, and they know that, and they're doing everything they can to like stop the inevitable. But we're at the point now where I can safely say that something like Tears of the Kingdom is more challenging than Elden Ring because there's more things to do, there's more puzzle solving, there's more mechanics, like the action is more intense. Like Nintendo is has already beaten Elden Ring in its own game, and it's only a matter of time until the community starts to acknowledge it.